Hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Terry Ryder, founder of hotspotting.com.au, and today we're going to discuss the nation's extraordinary real estate market from the viewpoint of finance. My special guest today is the award-winning mortgage broker Louise Lucas of the Property Education Company. And our topic relates to the reality that most Australians are in lockdown or operating under travel restrictions, thereby in many cases saving a lot of money. Research data shows that Australians collectively saved $60 billion just from not being able to travel overseas in the past 12 months. And other research suggests Australians are putting that money into investments or renovations. But there are many possibilities. And to discuss them, I'm joined today by the Oracle of Information on Real Estate Finance, Louise Lucas. Hello, Louise, welcome.
Thank you, Terry. It's super to be here. God knows we need anything to do here in Victoria to keep us out of lockdown, because tragically last time, Terry, we got to meet, it was May, and I got to sit side by side with you in Queensland, which was like a hoot and a half, and now of course we've got nothing better to do. I've actually got turmeric stains on my fingers from cooking. It's just like appalling. It's so scary. But today we are talking about, and I'm going to share my screen and get onto the slideshow. Play from the start. Go for it. So I'm Louise, obviously from the Property Education Company. I'm also joined today by Penny Morton and Caitlin Holmes, who are a couple of our brokers, who also may be able to contribute or help along the way, which is good. First of all, everyone who's here, I need you to check in. Everyone knows that, okay? So grab that QR code. Actually, it's a funny thing, because Terry, you and I did a seminar, a real seminar in the Windsor in Melbourne about 5 years ago. Do you remember that?
Vaguely. It's an awful long way for my memory to stretch back, but back in the day. It
might be even longer, actually. It could be like 7 or 8 years. But anyway, it was a long time ago. And at the time, you had a QR code for people to use. You were so in front of the pack. And of course, no one really knew what to do with it then, but now they should be all ready. So get your masks on, people, because you know what it's like, and check in, because that's what we have to do. But what we would love you to do is jump into the chat and tell us where you're from and what you're intending to do with your extra money from lockdown. So please jump on and say hello and tell us what you're doing with your money in lockdown. Okie dokie.
And you can put those comments or questions you might have in either the chat box or the Q&A panel that you should see.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, stocks. What are you telling us? You're in the wrong webinar. Geelong. Okay, property. Good on you, Lisa. You're a winner. Oh, that's good. Tell you, we've had clients very thrilled they've bought in Geelong in the last 12 months.
Well, yeah, and even happier if they bought, say, 3 to 4 years ago, and it's still rising. It's quite remarkable. Markets like Geelong and Ballarat are still, even though they've been pumping for several years before this national boom, they're still rising, prices just keep heading north. Awesome.
Terry, why do you think Geelong is so hot? We've just got to answer that question.
Well, I mean, initially it was, this big trend that's sweeping the company, which I call the exodus to affordable lifestyle. I think it really started with buyers out of Melbourne sort of seeking alternatives not too far from Melbourne, more affordable, different lifestyle, but still in touch with Melbourne. So Geelong was one of the first to actually be a visible recipient of that trend. It offers an affordable alternative, and it's a lifestyle buy as well, because most of Geelong is sitting on the Bellarine Peninsula with water on 3 sides, so it's got that lifestyle element, but at much more affordable prices than closer into the centre of Melbourne. And it's just got that enduring popularity. And the other factor, of course, is its local economy is very strong. It's managed to transition very successfully from the old economy, where it used to be about the car plant and sort of more smokestack industries, to the new economy, where it's more all about education and health services and
I think they got some government offices open there as well, didn't they?
Yeah, so a very strong local economy. So there's lots of jobs in the Geelong area as well. It's not just about people buying there and commuting to Melbourne or working remotely. There's lots of, it's a very strong local economy. So all sorts of reasons why Geelong continues to pump very strongly.
So that's what lots of people have done, upgraded their home because of the lockdowns. And yes, you're right, Melbourne, people were desperate, still desperate to get out. We do appreciate that.
Well,
but anyway.
I think one of the key things, Louise, is that the trend, like people moving to places like Geelong or Ballarat or Bendigo, it predated the pandemic. It was well underway before we'd even heard of COVID-19. It's just that the pandemic has given greater momentum to a trend that was already underway.
Yeah, I think people were more worried about going to work before, because if you had to commute 5 days a week, but now that's clearly the most you're thinking is 2 or 3, changes your whole perspective, actually. Yeah. But anyway, we shall push on and talk finance, because that's a really fun topic, Terry. Oh, please, my team would love, the team who support us, asked, can you please get social with us, because I am the worst case at sorting this, and the other ladies are much better than me at this, but I'd love your help if you could like our page. They would love you to do that. Oh my God, we'd be so grateful. Anyway, just know the information we're sharing today is of general information, obviously, and even if I sound actually like very authoritative and do this, I'm actually not speaking to you, I'm just talking generally. So if you really want us to look at your personal circumstances, we'd love to help you. So just so you know, we're here because I love to educate people, and we love sharing knowledge and helping people understand, because it's got a lot more complicated than it was ever previously. So as Terry told you, where we've come from, and we've been around doing this for a long time. So what to do with the money. So the key things I'm just going to quickly review today, and then we can get into some questions, is the upside of lockdown. We're just going to review redraw and offset accounts, because there's often a lot of confusion with them. Things that are important with refinancing, DTIs or debt to income ratios. What's all the talk about them at the moment? Because actually it's interesting, Terry, back in May when we did this, we had a question from someone worried about DTIs when they're refinancing or getting loans, and it wasn't a problem then at all, but it's becoming a lot bigger problem now. And dog properties, we're going to talk with Terry about, so you've had a dog in your portfolio forever, is it time to move it on, or are you at risk of buying someone else's dog, and how to avoid that? So, oh yes, this is just to we were trying to say, we think Terry was the bottom middle one, but any of us who've suffered through this haircut arrangement, because we're needing haircuts in Melbourne at the moment as well, and I actually cut my son's hair during the pandemic last year, and I thought I did a fabulous job, but he's moved in with his girlfriend this year, and I think she did it much worse, but what can I say? So redraw or offset accounts. So just to explain really clearly and as basically as I can, a mortgage, you have say a mortgage of 400,000 plus an offset, and you've got 10,000 in your offset account, which is just a savings account attached to the mortgage. So you are only paying interest on the 390. Now, if your actual loan of 400,000 is a principal and interest loan, your repayment will not change. So say your repayment is $2,326, it'll be the same the next month. It won't change due to whatever's in the offset account, but it just means you're paying more of the principal off. So the repayment stays the same, but your loan should come down a lot quicker. So what's the difference with the redraw? People go, well, I just put my money in the loan and that makes the same. Well, it's not the same. And as we pointed out last year when we talked at this, there's a real problem with redraw because it depends on the circumstances when you might use it, and you need to have that review. But one of the issues is ME Bank last year withdrew all the clients' redraw, just cancelled redraw, because technically that portion is managed by the bank. What the bank cannot do is withdraw money from your offset account, no matter what. So I always find that quite a bit of control might be better. So with redraw, you might consider it mainly if you're an owner-occupier and if the property is never going to be an investment property. Because if you pay off a owner-occupied property and then convert it into investment, the loan has been paid off. The debt is no longer it cannot be redrawn. It can be redrawn, but not for that purpose because it's already been paid off, that loan. So therefore, it's not tax deductible. Now, you want to draw up a separate loan, that's the other thing, for a deposit. So people go, oh, look, I've paid off my home loan, but I've got it in redraw. I'll just redraw the funds and use it for an investment. If it's a completely paid off loan, fabulous. Yes, you can reappoint that money and now it's clean, it's for an investment. However, if the money has some debt still remaining and you're just redrawing the cash to go use it as a deposit for an investment property, you're now mixing your owner-occupied and investment debt. No longer is it tax deductible, that deposit. So just watch out for that. It's a really tricky area and people get it wrong all the time. And amazingly, accountants do the same. They often will say to people, oh, it's owner occupied, just draw it up and then we'll just use it for whatever. But it's really important that you keep them separate. And the ATO are onto you. I'll tell you why. On your tax return now, they will ask you, did you refinance that loan in the last 12 months? They're actually looking for these cases where people are redrawing the debt and then using it for something else, but it's not really tax deductible. So watch out for that. For investors, consider using an offset account because you can do it at any time, but it's always better to have those funds available at another day. Adil, you just said something. Can you please highlight quickly? What's your question? Sorry, Terry, maybe you can see it better than I can.
Adil, can you please highlight quickly the difference between redraw and refinance?
So, a redraw is you're redrawing the money out of the same loan. So if the purpose of the loan was to buy your owner-occupied property, it's that purpose is still for that loan. However, it depends where it's paid off. However, refinancing is actually rewriting the loan. So actually changing it and the purpose of it completely. So that can be something different altogether. So they are completely different things.
So Nigel's comment there may be relevant to what you currently decided, saying our property advisor and accountant said redrawing our own home loan to use as an investment was okay and fully tax deductible. Does it speak to? If
you're redrawing from a loan that is still got personal debt on it, then that's not correct. But it depends on your circumstances and has your loan been completely paid off, Nigel? Because that's where it'd make a difference. Then you can redraw, but it's actually usually better to rewrite the loan as an investment loan. Does that make sense? I hope. And it's got to be separate. That's the main thing. It wasn't fully paid. Okay, yeah. Then you should be keeping it separate, definitely, because the ATO will go in and look at that and say, well, that's clearly owner-occupied debt. You can't just claim the whole lot for investment. Your accountant can separate it out, but if they actually ask you for statements to back that up and you're audited, I would be very loath to take that to the ATO because that's just the sort of thing they love to use against you. So I would be actually having a look. Can I suggest you have a look? Yeah, I'm not giving tax advice, Stephen. You're actually right. And it just depends. Absolutely right. I'm definitely not an accountant. And you can organise it, but it's just better when you have it separate. It usually is much easier. And from all accounting points of view, to have the loans specified separately. Totally right. That's exactly right. But it does make it difficult. I would recommend having a look. There's a lot of really good advice on the BANTAX website, BANTACS, on this very point, on how to set it up. And have a look. There are accountants who just deal in property investment, so have a look at what they have to say. But it is a problem when people are redrawing and reusing and using the same accounts, and it can get you into trouble. So I would always refer to your accountant to get that correct advice. BANTACS is Bantax is the site that I would suggest you have a look at for sure. Okay. And one of the things you might like to be aware of is that some lenders, and only a few, allow you to have multiple offset accounts against the one loan. So that can be a really handy feature, but not many people are aware of it. And that way you could actually use an offset account and offset a home loan with, you could say, put all your GST cash that you've held in your business in one of these offsets. It's completely separate and independent, but it's still offsetting your home loan and saving you money on your interest. So it's very useful and I'd highly recommend it. Now,
people still asking questions about that website, Bantax. One more time, Louise.
BANTACS.
Bantax, okay.
I'm pretty sure that's right. Let's have a look at refinancing. So having a look at refinancing, one of the things I want you to consider is you should be looking at, with all the growth we've had in the last, 6 to 12 months, you might be able, sometimes St. George does, but not usually. Emac, I can't really quite work out what your name is. Thank you, Katie, for doing that. That's perfect. She's put it in the chat. So St. George does allow some, but the main Bank West is definitely there. CBA does. Macquarie's great with multiple offsets. ING's bringing it in later this year. Auswide Bank's another one that does allow multiple offsets. So there's a few there, but there's lots that don't. So be aware, because it can cause you to have, it's so handy. You could have one for your kids, one for your personal, save all that money and just be reducing your interest on your home loan. Fantastic setup and very useful. With refinancing, one of the things, because we've all had this big growth in our property values, the bank might have more security than it actually needs. So you might have maxed out your loans, particularly for investing, you might have gone at 90%, and they might even be cross-secured with your home. And now might be the time to actually remove some security from the bank, if you can, and get them individually secured, or restructure just to use that extra equity as an investment. So you might have had a separate account for your deposits, and now might be the time to actually say, well, I'll refinance that deposit into the actual security that it relates to. So sometimes we've drawn a deposit account down against our home loan, and now it might be good to shift it back to the actual investment property so it's separate. Why this is also useful is in retirement, there's some problems with having your investment debt secured against your owner-occupied home and not against the actual investment properties. Something to watch out for. Noel Whittaker was mentioning this, who's a financial planner. Have a look what he has to say about it. But it's interesting that when you're being assessed by Centrelink, and that they say, well, if the debt's against your home, that's bad luck. We don't count that. That's an unencumbered property for your investment, so that is added to the asset pool, and they don't count the debt, even though you've actually still got debt. So this is a really important point. So you need to be aware when you're doing this for your heading towards retirement and end of life, you want to free up your home, pay that off as quickly as you can, and so that's unencumbered, and leave your investment debts on your actual investments. The other thing to consider, yes, I said, and the rates, sometimes you can get better interest rates by having your owner-occupied property and your investments at the same lender. Sometimes they'll use by crossing them and using them both together, but some don't. So just keep that in mind. If you're negotiating with your existing lender, say to them, well, if you've got my owner-occupied and my investment debt, can I get a better deal? Or if I just give you the investment. Sometimes they prefer to have your home because they think you're more committed. There's obviously something in the stats that shows that that's how it works, I suspect. But anyway, and one of the things you might consider, although it's been interesting, the longer term interest rates on refinancing for 4 and 5 years, we're not getting them under 2% anymore. We were. So the banks obviously think that we're not going to be sitting here in 4 or 5 years' time with really low rates. It's clear. They've seen us, there's light at the end of the tunnel, which is good to hear. But also, so maybe you need to consider getting as low a rate as you can. What we've also found lately is the variable rates have been coming down. And usually over the last couple of years, variable rates have been at least 0.5%, if not higher, above fixed rates. So it's interesting, variable rates have been coming down and they're removing the longer term fixed rates. And the other thing is one of the banks was offering yesterday half price rate lock. So a rate lock is when you guarantee the rate you've been offered until settlement. Often lenders will make the rate is not set until the actual settlement date. Even if you've signed documents saying you're having a fixed rate loan, they insist you pay an extra fee to actually guarantee the rate. One lender who doesn't do that is Macquarie. From the minute your loan is approved, your rate is set. So that's a bonus with them. However, most of the lenders will charge you a rate lock fee. Well, one of them's offering a half price rate lock fee. So you suspect that they wouldn't be doing that if they thought rates were moving. You just know that they're doing it to keep the money for themselves. Now, debt to income ratios. One of the things we were talking about is the Treasurer's suggesting, and this was in the paper in the last few days because of a speech he did on Friday, which was about the options they have to cool our heated, pardon me, property market because prices are going mad. So couple of the options they said was increase the interest serviceability buffers. Pardon me. Oh, it's not COVID, I'm sure. But with the serviceability, some of the banks are still for owner-occupiers as low as 4.95. Most of the others have moved up to 5.25 or 5.35. So that's the ratios, the interest rate they're testing your serviceability on. And other offers that they've said that other ways they're going to cool that heated market might be instituting portfolio restrictions using a debt to income and loan to value ratios. We've already found that often now with loan to value. You used to be able to borrow up to 95% without too much trouble for investment. Not at the moment. So what is a DTI? I'm just going to go through that for you. Debt to income ratios is just the total of the applicant's existing debt and their new debt, including any fees and lender's mortgage insurance. That's what the LMI is. So anytime you have a loan over 80% of the value of the property, so an 80% loan to value ratio, over 80, you'll pay lender's mortgage insurance generally. And the income component is the total applicant's gross income. But the problem with applicant's gross income at the moment, if you had a bonus or if you've been at all affected by COVID in your income and had any JobKeeper, then they're not counting any bonuses, or they won't count a lot of commissions, they won't count lots of extras that you might usually be counting on in your income. So your income's been diminished by these things, but your debt's, still high. So some of the banks are suggesting that if you have a DTI or a debt to income ratio over 6, so that's 6 times your income to debt, some lenders will no longer let you have cash out. So you'd often use cash out to go and invest and buy a new property. That could be your deposit or for shares. Others will lend you up to 100 grand, but only if your DTI is 6 and under. So it's a problem. You've just got to be aware of this. And at the moment, we're suspecting these changes are coming in quite radically in the next 6 to 8 weeks. So if you were looking at refinancing your investment portfolio, you would do it sooner rather than later. I wouldn't be waiting, because I suspect this will make people with multiple properties, it will be really hard for you to refinance. It could be much harder by the end of the year. I mean, we go through these phases all the time, and it changes up and down regularly. But anyway, so it might also be important for you to reduce your current rates on everything that you can. This helps your serviceability. So getting the lowest rate you can, and if you pay principal and interest, that can also help, because otherwise the term of the loan is reshortened in your repayment, and so that's used against you in servicing as well. So these are just things to be aware of, and why you need someone probably who's more experienced to have a look at it. Penny, you might like to pipe in.
Oh, so in relation to the interest-only payments, if hypothetically you've got a 5-year interest-only term on a loan, the bank would look at the repayment over a 25-year period. The longer the interest-only period, the shorter they're looking at the repayment term. So that really impacts borrowing capacity.
And they used to be able to just phone them up and say, I'll have another 5 years interest only. Well, that's all gone by the by. Now they want to assess you, and they are unlikely to extend the interest only term just on, your say so. So it could be really problematic for people who are relying on having only interest only repayments on their investment debt. So if you think you're going to run into trouble on that, you need to move sooner rather than later. Anything else you want to say there?
The DTI, I see there's a few questions around the debt to income ratio. There are definitely lenders out there that will look at DTI higher than 6. It's not a blanket rule.
No.
Yeah, and that's just something that we come across, I guess. And it's a case-by-case basis, really.
Yeah. It can be. It's a problem that's, I think, it's going to be worse as the year goes on, because that's what they're using to cool markets. But anyway, Nigel's asked a question about if you buy an investment in a trust, do they look at your personal? It depends on the lender and who owns the trust. So, and the lender generally will look at where the money's coming from, and depends how much you're borrowing and what's it for. It's not many who'll just do a standalone on a property without any income at all. So they do tend to review the lot. Penny, what do you say?
Again, that really comes down to the lender. Some banks, if you're self-employed, they want to look at the company debts for servicing, where there's other banks that don't. So yeah, it's really personal circumstances.
Yeah, that's right. And this week we've had some lenders say where previously they were looking at only 1 year's financials, which was fabulous. Now they're reviewing the last 2. So they are making it harder, not easier, for companies and people who are self-employed to borrow. There's still some out there. There's plenty of opportunity, but you've got to know who, and it is really tricky. It's the rules are changing daily. 1 minute they're saying, oh, we'll just look at your income as a salary from your own company. So that's great. We can just use your notice of assessment and your taxable income from your tax return and not include anything with the company. So that can be handy, but you just get an accountant's letter to say that the company's trading profitably and can continue to pay your wage. So that can be useful in circumstances, but generally if you're going that well, you want the income that's in the company as well included in your servicing. So we need both sides, not just one. And like lenders like Westpac don't even include the company income. So if you've made 100 grand in your company and 100 grand to yourself, you wouldn't necessarily want your accountant paying it all out to you. So you want to use that income because it's still yours. So it depends on the lender and what your circumstances are. So there's another question about, is it best to keep an investment property as interest only? Not necessarily, because it depends on your circumstances. And the problem is people often get to their end of their lives, they've barely paid off their home, and they've kept these investments as interest only when they probably could have paid them off, particularly at rates. You know, we're getting interest rates of around 2.14 for 3 years fixed for investment. They're terribly low. And if you're already paying 3 or 4%, you may as well convert to P&I at this level, principal interest at this level, and then you can actually pay them off and pay the same amount in your repayment. So we've been doing for a lot of people this year, actually refinancing them for a much lower rate, but they've converted the loans to principal and interest because they can pay them off. But it depends. If you had no other personal debt, you'd certainly start paying off your investments if you needed to. There's no need for you not to. What's your purpose of that property? That's what you need to consider. Am I keeping this property, or am I just going to sell it in a few years and then it doesn't matter? Enjoy your life and don't pay it off. It all depends on you and what you want to do. Because, like, if you have a multitude of investments, you might think, well, no, blow that. When I die, I really won't care, and I'd rather have lived well now. But if you actually want to live off them in retirement, well, then you want to get cracking and pay them off. So it all depends on your strategy. And that's why you need to have a talk to someone about it and think about it long term. Dog properties, Terry, we need to talk about these because people have a lot of properties that they might want to offload now that the market's picked up. What's your view?
Yeah, as always, it's a case-by-case scenario, but it depends what we mean by dog properties. There's a lot of people that I've had conversations with in various forms in recent times who have owned property in areas that haven't performed over the last 6 years, for example. And, you know, they've kind of run out of patience and think, should I get rid of it? It's not performing. In most locations, that there will come a time when that location will start to perform better. A case in point is Logan City in the southern suburbs of the Brisbane metropolitan area. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, there were quite a lot of investors buying in that location because those suburbs were very affordable. They had good rental yields for houses, but they haven't shown any capital growth for the last 5 years. And so, you know, a lot of people felt, no, this is the dog in my portfolio, get rid of it. But now that market is pumping so strongly because Brisbane's time to shine has arrived. And suddenly the investor owners of those properties have a whole different viewpoint about those properties, not so doggy anymore. I think, so that's the first point.
I've had similar with clients who bought in Ballarat and were waiting for years and then gave up, had a small amount of growth, but they really wanted to shoot the lights out. Well, of course, in this last 12 months, it's shot the lights out, but they've already gone. So it's a shame. People give up on property often too early.
Oh, look, yeah, that's right, they do. People need to understand more fully just that a real estate investment is a long-term proposition, and that there's no location that performs strongly all the time. All locations go through periods where there's perhaps a lull, where they're plateaued out, or even when values may fall a little bit for various local reasons. But if you take a long-term view and you've chosen your location reasonably well, you will get performance over time. A case in point, in my own personal situation, I mean, I bought a property some years ago in a small town in regional New South Wales, primarily because it was very cheap and a great rental yield, but I knew the Inland Rail link was coming there. For several years, that location did absolutely nothing, but I maintained faith in it. In the last 12 months, because they're now building the section of the Inland Rail link that goes through this particular town, the median house price for that location has increased 47% in the last 12 months. And it's a classic example and lesson for myself that, patience is a very important thing when you're in the property investment game, because, it does sometimes take time for a location to perform as you expected. But if you do show patience and maintain the faith, then that performance will come along. The other one is Harvey Bay, where I owned a property that hadn't performed particularly well for a long time, but right now that market is just going ballistic and values are rising very, very fast. So
what I've often found is people have increased their living expenses and going through the private school fees in the teen years, and things get really expensive. And they tend to blame the investment property as, oh, that place is costing me money because of maintenance, or one year it might be like all houses need maintenance, and that one year might come when it needs the hot water replaced or money spent on it, and that seems to be the camel that broke the back of the property, and so they tend to want to sell it straight away instead of actually maybe considering, is it a lifestyle thing? Where is the money going? So maybe people need to look at, what are we spending on? But we've been saving, so there's some properties that definitely, hey Terry, I'd been meaning to ask you about places like Moranbah, where people had a lot of properties that are just dogs. They've had forever. They still rent, but is there any chance of them ever coming back to the highs that they were?
Yeah, I mean, the locations that I get those sorts of inquiries about most often are Moranbah, coal mining town in central Queensland, and Gladstone, the regional city where way too many people piled in. It's almost 10 years ago now. And because that city was having an incredible economic boom because of 3 massive gas projects totaling about $60 billion being built at the one time, developers piled in, built way too much new real estate and caused a huge oversupply, which caused the market to crash. But those markets are coming back. It may be some time before they actually reach their former peak levels, but certainly Gladstone, vacancies were once 10%, now they're down around about 1%. Rents are growing again, sales activity is rising and prices are rising again. So there's hope for people who were stuck with properties that were worth less than they paid, that they will get back to some sort of par and maybe get some growth again. Moranbah is a more long-term proposition because Moranbah just went to crazy levels, median house price $750,000, and then it dropped to $150,000. Can you imagine the pain of an investor owner who bought something at the peak of that market, $750,000 for the typical house, and then values dropped to $150,000, and rents that were $1,200 a week dropped to $300 a week. But that market, like Gladstone, is now showing increasing signs of recovery, and it's another example where patience is required. But also the overall lesson is, why buy in these sorts of places that are, by their very nature, very high risk, very volatile, and prone to extraordinary booms, but also exceptional busts as well. It's a lesson, a cautionary lesson to avoid those sorts of locations. One horse towns, locations where it's all about just mining, very, very risky, or even locations where it's just about, in tourism towns, coastal villages, where there's nothing to the economy of tourism, also high risk, unlikely to produce sustainable growth. You need to think about the parameters of the locations in which you're buying to avoid having those sorts of dogs in your portfolio.
Someone's asked Terry about Rockingham in WA. Do you know about there?
Yeah, right now, Rockingham's the name of a suburb. It's also the name of a local government area, which includes suburbs like Baldivis and Secret Harbour and others. It's currently our #1 pick for Perth. Our top 5 Perth hotspots report has the Rockingham precinct as a #1 pick. Wonderful value for money. The Perth market is one of those that, because its economy is so hooked into the resources sector, it's also quite a volatile market and is prone to peaks and troughs, and it's been through half a dozen years of no performance. Now it's recovering and coming back strongly, and locations like Rockingham, where we've got a series of coastal suburbs fronting the water, where median prices for houses are still in the 300,000s, lots of big employment nodes nearby, good transport links to the centre of Perth. I think it's a really good one to consider.
Terrific. Interesting. People have asked about, I've got a couple of questions on, if you want to grow, which is an interesting question, you want to grow multiple portfolios, should you keep them interest only? That used to be an advantage, Naisha, about when banks did servicing on interest on the actual repayment. There's virtually, like Caitlin or Penny, can either of you think of any? There's one lender who now assesses on your actual repayment, I think, but almost none others. And it used to be you could have them interest only, and that meant you could borrow more because they'd count the repayments you were paying as interest only instead of a principal and interest. But now they're very dedicated to finding out what's the term of your loan, how long have you got left to pay it, at what point does it convert from interest only to principal and interest. So it actually makes it much harder to grow a portfolio if all the properties are interest only, depending on your income, of course. But they actually assess you a lot harder because, as Penny was saying, they shorten the term from a 30-year term or 35 down to 25 or 20. So it's worth getting someone to assess that before you go deciding which way you'll go. So
Louise, can I suggest also a very important factor for people, and particularly in the early stages of growing a portfolio, that it's quite important to have those early properties where the rental yield is sufficient. Actually, the property pays its own way, that you're not having to dip into your own income to support that property. So something that's positive cash flow or at least neutral, because
that's a great point. Yeah,
because I think it affects their ability to go back and get a loan for the next property. If they're negatively geared, that will impact negatively. Whereas if it's positive cash flow properties in their portfolio, their chances of getting a loan for the next property would be greater, I would imagine.
It can.
Sorry.
Yeah, go. I know.
Can I just add something on that?
Yes, you
With
can.
a property that is earning significantly great rent compared to the property value, that's also something that banks look at quite closely. So usually 6% rental yield is the maximum that they will use for servicing on a loan, regardless of what the rental yield is.
So they take quite a conservative view. They have a bit of a cap on what they will consider. And that's a relevant thing at the moment, because vacancy rates are so chronically low in most parts of Australia at the moment that rentals are actually very strong. And so it's strengthening yields, even in places where prices are rising at the moment.
And on that rental return and what banks will consider, you might be considering Airbnb-ing your properties. Great, as long as it's all declared in your tax return and we got at least a good 12 months worth, preferably longer, the banks will then consider it. But it has to be declared in your income. And it's same with if you're renting out rooms or anything. As long as it's declared and we can see it in a tax return, then they'll count it, but otherwise they won't. So, and they generally won't count money when it's you're renting out a room in your own home. They're not too keen on that either. But anyway, someone else had a question about, which was a really great question, about buying one property together and then buying the second one. Praveen, that was a great question. If one investment property has joint ownership, does serviceability change if going for the second property with just one, the primary earner going for it? And that can make a difference. It can help. It depends, again, on the lender, and will they consider just people servicing which part of the debt is their own. And this gets really tricky. You have to have your actual circumstances, and depending on what your partner earns, can they be declared as being self-sufficient, or is the bank going to add them as a dependent, which could make things worse for you rather than better? So sometimes it's better to have them in, depending on the lender. Sometimes it's better to leave them out and just buy it in your own name. Or you can buy it in whichever name. That doesn't affect the loan, but it might help for servicing or not. So, Caitlin or Penny, any further thoughts on that? No? Okay. Penny, someone else, Terry, someone else has asked about Geelong again. And I love, when will we see the peak? Good luck.
Yeah, well, we actually had the peak had actually been reached, and then the COVID's kind of given us a second wave of demand. I think that argument would apply to Ballarat as well, that the evidence was that the Geelong and Ballarat markets, after say 3 years of really good growth, had reached their peak, had passed their peak, and were starting to sort of taper off. But then we've got this further surge of demand, and so that they've come back a second wave of growth. And the evidence that we've most recently looked at for Geelong suggests that, you know, Geelong's still got growth in it. It's been a remarkable performer, but one of the parameters we look at is sales activity, the number of properties selling. We look for patterns there because we think it's a good forward indicator of what's going to happen with prices. And there are still many suburbs in the city of Greater Geelong where sales activity is rising. And then when we look at analyse the price data, the rate of price growth is still accelerating in many of those places. Vacancies are very low. That's another good forward indicator.
Terry, this is in your price predictor report, isn't it?
Our price predictor index is the one where we publish the results of our analysis, particularly of sales activity, you know, the sales volumes quarter by quarter, which we think is a great forward indicator of prices. But I'm also looking at things more broadly for a special report that I'm putting together with Canstar at the moment, where we're looking at those factors, but also other forward indicators like vacancy rates and rentals. Some of those markets, some of those suburbs in the city of Greater Geelong are going to be featured quite prominently in that report. The suburbs that include Corio, Belmont, and St Albans Park, I think, are the ones that spring to mind that have the parameters from a number of metrics that continue showing really good price growth in the city of Greater Geelong. So it's been one of the great performers in Australian real estate over the last 3 or 4 years and continues to be.
Can you remember when you used to do a report on, was the crime thing?
Crime?
Yeah, the crime, and we found it didn't really have an effect on property prices. I wondered now, so many people are at home, being a house robber, you wouldn't have much opportunity anymore. So
no.
There and other people COVID affected, but
it's a good point, Louise, because you know, I'm doing sort of you know, communicating with real estate consumers in all sorts of forums like these all the time, and you kind of get this attitude from people that down market areas or areas that have lower socioeconomic demographics, or the crime rate is higher, they're going to be inferior places to own real estate. And there really is no evidence that that's the case. Down market areas can show extremely good capital growth rates. If you look across Sydney, what are the locations with the highest long-term capital growth rates? They include some of the swanky suburbs, but they also include places out at Penrith and places down in the far southwest around Campbelltown. You know, ugly real estate, as I like to call it sometimes, does show really good capital growth if it has certain qualities. If it's affordable, if there are major employment nodes close by, if the infrastructure, the basic infrastructure is good, people will go and live there because it provides everything they need at an affordable price, and there will be growth. And there's really no evidence that suggests that being down market and have maybe a higher crime rate actually impacts on capital growth negatively. It doesn't.
No. And one of the things they were worried about with capital growth was the lack of migrants in the last 18 months that would have had this huge impact. But as we know, we had like 300,000 expats returning madly, but how long that will continue, they may not want to come back now. But we suspect when they open the borders again, migration here is going to be massive. What's your view?
Oh, absolutely. One of the reasons why I think this upcycle, this boom has longevity, it's not a flash in the pan thing, is because there's so many different things driving it. And one of the reasons why I think it will, the demand will continue to come in, is that there's going to be a second wave when we get to the point of reopening international borders. There's going to be, you know, a massive influx of people wanting to come to Australia as overseas migrants. That tap's been turned off for now, but that will be turned back on. And, you know, Australia is seen as a safe haven, not only relatively for COVID-19, but as an economic safe haven and just a great place to live. And so we're going to see that factor return big time, amongst others that we haven't felt.
I gather Canada has had a big influx of migrants since they've opened up, and they've been the beneficiary of that as well. But I'm sure Australia will be even more so. I just get a feeling we are living in the best place in the world. One of the things is people saying, well, it's such a hot market, is it the wrong time to buy? And you just got to think, well, not when rates are around 2%. You know, it just feels like it's particularly if you're a first time buyer or buying, but you don't want to be stretching your portfolio to the max, but maybe you want to consider getting them and getting a low rate and getting in and start paying things off. Also, we want to consider, just because it's a cheap property, it doesn't mean it's a good property. So don't buy another dog. And that's why you do need to do your research properly and find the right reason to buy, not just because, oh, everything else is really expensive, so I found this cheap thing. But there might be a reason. Maybe avoid that. And be prepared to fix up, because often that's where people are making great money on properties, and it's made a big difference. Be prepared often to settle quickly. If you can get your loan organised really quickly and settle quickly, or slowly. So you've got to find out what the vendors need, and that way can really help you when you're trying to buy in a hot market. You need to be ready to act and move quickly. So you want to have all your ducks in a row with your finance and be prepared, and then offer what they want, fast or slow. That can make a big difference. Just a few notes on lenders' mortgage insurance. There's still some places, there's not many left for first home buyers in the first home buyers deposit scheme, where the federal government has been paying the lender's mortgage insurance if you're borrowing over 80% of the loan. So there's a couple of places still available, but a few lenders, those listed there, some of them are lending for first home buyers particularly, up to 85% of the value of the property, with no lender's mortgage insurance, which is also a value. And other banks are lending to different industries up to 90 with no lender's mortgage insurance. So it's quite important that where you make your money on property is on the way in. Don't pay too much. That's the real key, because that's where people go wrong. You do need a good mortgage broker. I'm not just for us. Go and find one for you. And because the laws are changing daily, we work incredibly hard, and we have a whole team in the background researching every day all the scenarios and where's the best lenders for people, because it's never a one-hit wonder. We are accredited, our aggregators are accredited with over 60 lenders. We personally are accredited with over 40. And we use 18 different lenders for people in the last 12 months. So there's a huge range of different lenders for your circumstances. The thing with mortgage brokers is we are legally obliged to work in your best interests. So unlike the banks, they don't have a best interest duty, we do. And the only reason people stay and work with brokers is because they do a great job. So hopefully you have one and you find one if you haven't used one before. And my challenge to you is I want you to review your last 3 months of spending. Now, this was supposed to go away about the spending issue. They weren't going to keep looking at our, ins and outs on, are you spending $5 a month on whatever? Or as someone asked, some guy was spending like $4 whatever every morning. Wonder what that was. Oh, it might have been his coffee, but they asked, was it a loan, for God's sake? But anyway, but you might like to review your last 3 months of spending, because the banks are trawling them. And I'm telling you, there is no let up in this. If you're spending $100 on Tats Lotto every week, stop. These are the things that they don't want to see. They don't want to see any sports bet or online gambling. They don't want to see any Afterpay, because they didn't fund Afterpay, so they certainly don't want you involved with that. And some people have open Afterpays of like 20 grand. Well, that counts as a liability against you. So be wary of those sort of things. But just trawl through your accounts for the last 3 months and mark off things that you think, oh, maybe I don't want the lender seeing that. Now's your time to clean up before you go and apply for a loan. Okay, and yes, here's our QR code again. So if anyone wants to connect with us, please feel free to subscribe and talk to us anyway. And any other questions, any other burning questions, Terry or Katie, did you see any that might have come up?
Look, there's lots of questions. Can we zip through some of them quite quickly in the time available? We have someone asking a question, is 20 kilometres out of the CBD too far in South Australia? I guess we're talking Adelaide there. Look, I think there's a bit of a fallacy about the importance of being within proximity to the CBD. I don't think it's ever been the case that, you know, you get the best growth by being closer to the CBD. There's other things that's more important to be near. And increasingly as time goes on, particularly in this era where more and more people are working remotely, proximity to the CBD for more and more people is absolutely irrelevant. So I just don't think it's a concern. You need to think about what the location you're considering is near that's desirable other than the CBD. Gladstone, as Annette saying, you mentioned Gladstone as previously being a dog that's showing signs of recovery. Is it still a market that's wise to avoid? I generally say yes, Annette. These kinds of markets are always volatile because of the very nature of their economies. That's true of mining towns or regional centres, which are fundamentally about the resources sector. They are ones to avoid. And particularly when there are so many, I mean, the whole of Australia is your market. There's so many great places to invest, both capital cities and regions. Why would you choose a risky proposition like a Gladstone or Moranbah?
One of the things I found a survey, Terry, that said millennials are set to inherit trillions by, you know, into the 2030s. And so they're going to have more cash and more money due to baby boomers like ourselves passing it over, or and have, particularly now with COVID, not been able to have spent the last little while. Mind you, I'm going to make a good crack of it before I pass, hopefully. But anyway.
Okay. Speaking of babies, Louise, Vicky's asking a question. Can you buy a property under your child's name, like a baby? What are the benefits?
Yeah, I think that it's a legal age of it's got to be. I'm pretty sure it's 18 to purchase. Penny, you nodding the same. Yeah, and why would you want to do that? I'm not quite sure. You might be able to gift it to them at a certain, after, but it'll be difficult to buy it. If you're not on the title, you won't be borrowing.
At the opposite end of the spectrum, Belinda's asking, is property the best investment for someone who wants to retire in the next 2 years? And that would raise issues of getting finance, I would imagine, as well.
You can still borrow in your 60s and 70s, depending on what it is and your circumstances. So if you have a great income and you think you'll be able to do something about the debt and pay it off or pay it down, and you have some strategy for getting out of it, but no lender wants to lend to you under 2 years because they don't make any money on it. So you really want something a bit longer term.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends if you were going to inherit or had a big super payout coming. Oh, you've got super fund that is going to fund your lifestyle, and you'll be able to pay that investment property off with your super as you're living. Then yes, they'll accept that, depending on the lender, but they'll accept that. So it all depends on your circumstances.
Let's say she's got someone who's 75 years old and has money to invest to fund his retirement. He doesn't need a loan. Okay.
Well.
But I also had a mentoring client, a couple, and they were both in their 70s, and they wanted to buy an investment property to provide for their grandchildren, and they were able to get a loan, but it was just on a shorter term than might otherwise have been the case, I seem to recall.
Well, it depends on their view of the property, and if they think they're going to get great growth and a good return with, and they might feel more comfortable. They might already have a huge share portfolio. We can't give you finance advice about that. It all depends on your circumstances, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Lots of questions about location. Daniel was asking, is anything good in the Latrobe Valley in Victoria? Well, towns like Traralgon, Morwell, Moe have had fantastic growth in the last 12 months. They've all grown more than 20% with their median house prices in the last 12 months, and they're still very cheap because they're starting from a low base. Strong economy in that area, still worth considering, but bear in mind they've already had at least 1 year of very, very strong growth.
D. Wong has asked about someone using the bank of mum and dad, helping kids who have low income to purchase. Unfortunately, banks are not very interested in having you service their loan unless you have 2.5 million in net assets. and a very strong income. So if you don't have those circumstances, then you're not going to be assisting them with servicing an actual loan. You couldn't go as a servicing guarantor. And most banks are loath to have you as a servicing guarantor now. It's not a very popular thing at all. What they prefer is that you just gift them the cash if you can. So give them the funds and help them buy that way rather than actually service a loan. And maybe they need, and if their servicing is really tight, maybe they just need to adjust their pricing. I've had clients, generally they can do quite well servicing to meet their income, because if they can't afford the property and the loan on their income, then why are they buying a property that's costing them too much? They probably shouldn't be, just to get into a market. It's a big problem. Penny, what's your view?
I was just going to add on that as well.
To say something.
My turn.
Yeah, go.
So the other thing that banks look at is there a financial benefit to being a co-borrower on a loan? I've had inquiries where, the same thing, the children are earning $60,000. The parents are still working, and they thought, well, we can be co-borrowers on that loan with the children. And the banks aren't interested in that because there's no financial benefit for mum and dad to be a co-borrower for a property that they don't actually live in. So that's another reason why, the servicing side of it needs to be on that person buying the property.
Yeah. But what you can do is help them avoid lender's mortgage insurance with a security. So you could actually, if you had an investment property that's unencumbered, then lend them the security so they don't pay LMI. So that can help. They can still borrow and pay the loan, but you're actually stopping the fees. So that can be really useful, because LMI can be 20, 30 grand, depending on how old how big the property is, and it's all loan size dependent. So I had a client who actually went to buy he had quite a large portfolio, and he went to buy a property, this is years ago, off the plan, and the banks didn't like the security that he was purchasing. So he was stuck. He couldn't get a loan. So we could get a loan. He could service a loan, but he couldn't get a loan on that security. So luckily we had kept one the last time we'd refinanced in the drawer. So we pulled that one out of the drawer and used that to purchase the new property. Now, the new investment property that he's purchased, we have a title that's unencumbered. So he was able to actually use that because a very low LVR. We used a very low security cost against, and we used that for two of his sons to get a property each separately, but that same property has been used heaps and provided the kids didn't have to pay any lender's mortgage insurance buying these properties, because we used that property as a security guarantee, which is very different to servicing. So banks are still happy to do security guarantees, but not servicing guarantees, generally speaking. There's another question on construction loan minimum and requirements. Oh, here we go. Caitlin, Penny, go for it. You don't want to answer it either.
I'm definitely not the expert on construction loans.
So generally the banks want a construction contract. They will assess it very thoroughly, and it's good because at least your contract's also been matched against the bank's criteria, not just whatever the builder's told you it should be. They generally have 5 separate repayments. If a builder puts in 10 or different 8 or something, banks don't like it. So they want 5. So just give them 5. It's really simple and meet the criteria that they're asking for. So there's a huge, it depends on the construction and what you're advising and what you're needing for construction. You can do a construction with a renovation for 100 grand and they'll ask for a building contract for that, and it will add to the value. It depends on the circumstances, because you might need the bank to actually use the contract so you can lend against the equity in that building contract. So that can be a worthwhile thing to do to borrow more money if you have the servicing. So Daniel, I don't know if that helps you, but that's just some of the requirements around construction. Terry, there's another question there on what rent return would you expect to see on a purchase? Are we looking at a set figure?
Well, there's no one size fits all there. What would I want to see? Look, I think buying an investment property now, you should be looking for perhaps 5% and above, and that's not that hard to achieve. You can achieve that in some of the capital cities and some of the parts of some capital cities like Brisbane and Adelaide, but also particularly in regional areas. That's a pretty good rental return, which should mean that the property washes its own face, as they say, pays its own way, and makes it a lot easier for you as the owner to service that property. You know, if you choose your location well, you can get a nice combination of a high rental return, such as 5% or higher, and being a location that's going to show you good capital growth over time. That's achievable at the moment, particularly with regional real estate performing so strongly. But just referencing back to some of the earlier comments, you need to choose your location well. I think there's too many people seems to be operating with the mindset that everywhere's growing, so you can buy anywhere and you'll get growth. And that may be true in the short term, but you need to take a longer term view and buying locations that have the credentials for longer term growth. And that particularly applies to a strong and diverse local economy in particular, rather than one horse town type economies.
Yes. You also want to watch what's going in next door to your properties or where you're buying. It's not just the property or in the right area. It can also be in the wrong street. You need to assess all those sorts of things as well.
Please, we've gone over the hour and we've got sufficient questions there. We could go for another hour answering all those questions.
We could, but we better not, because
we better not. What I would suggest to people is if you've got questions that
feel free to ask.
would like answers to from Louise. Louise, how can they contact you to follow up if they
just use our QR code? Check in. Even if you guys in Queensland are not got it. We're over it in Melbourne, I can assure you. But anyway, check in or call us. Go to the website propertyed.com or give us a call. So
on what number would they give you a call?
Oh, we put it up earlier. Sorry, Terry. Get it off the website. That's the easiest way. I'm sure.
Okay. And for those people, there's a lot of questions there about locations, which is, I guess, really my territory. And we just don't have time. We could be here for another hour answering all those questions. But you are welcome to send me an email, ryder@hotspotting.com.au. If you've got a question about location that you would like an answer to, I'd be happy to get your email and give you a response. So we should wrap it up, I think. Thank you, Louise, for your presentation today. Lots of lessons there, lots of good information. For me, one of the fundamental lessons is that there's no one size fits all with the lending game. So many of the lenders have their own rules that they apply to assessing people that they might provide finance to, and it's just a very strong argument for the need for a good mortgage broker on your team. I'd always advocate that to people, that I can't see any way that the average punter can find their way through the maze that exists around all the different parameters and getting finance. You do need a good mortgage broker on your team.
It's changing so rapidly. The rules are changing daily from different lenders. We are really pushing hard to keep up, and it's a reassessment every day, Terry. It's like what worked yesterday might not work tomorrow.
I know. I've actually been in your office and watching the messages coming in that, you know, are just the latest situation, the latest interest rate data from various lenders. I mean, it's just constantly changing daily and throughout the day, and there's just no way the average consumer can keep up with it all. I don't even know how the mortgage brokers do, but certainly it's a very strong case to have a good mortgage broker on your team. And on that note, let's bring it to an end. Thank you, Louise, and Penny and Caitlin, for your participation. And
thanks for having us. It's delighted to help you.
Yeah, and all the people out there who are watching and listening, and those who submitted your comments and questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all of them, but please follow up with Louise, or if your questions about locations you're thinking of investing in, please send me an email at ryder@hotspotting.com.au. Okay, let's do it again soon.